Welcome back to After Effects, and welcome back to our beginner tutorial series. If you haven't seen the first episode, I highly suggest watching that first, as we are going to build on what we had learned, but use the same project file as before. In this episode, we are going to go over the panels on the right, we're going to learn more about keyframes, and we're going to learn more about compositions. So, we have our circle, but the movement of our circle is quite boring. It is very linear, as in, every frame the circle moves is the same amount of pixels before it, and the same amount of pixels after it. It doesn't speed up or slow down, and when it stops, it comes to an instant stop. If you are animating something and compositing it onto the real world, or even if you are animating something for an animation, you will want to remember the law of conservation of motion. Things that are in motion tend to stay in motion, and things that are at rest tend to stay at rest. What that means for you is that to make the circle's movements more realistic, it needs to speed up first, and then it needs to slow down when it stops. To do that, we are going to look at the graph editor. The graph editor is a very powerful and useful tool that everyone should have in their After Effects repertoire. The graph editor button is this button right here, above your assets in your composition. Clicking on it will bring up a screen that may seem daunting. However, it is actually quite simple once you break it down. First, let us make sure our position keyframes are selected by clicking on our position parameter. If we had more than just those two keyframes, however, we would want to select just the keyframes we were working with. First, let us give our circle a brief moment of stillness before moving forward by moving the beginning keyframes a few frames forward. 2 should work. Lastly, let's give it a few frames of stillness at the end too. Next, we are going to easy ease our keyframes. There are multiple ways of doing this, but first we are going to do it here in the graph editor so that you can see the change. We will highlight our keyframes, and then we will click the easy ease button down here at the bottom. As you can see, instead of our circle moving at the same speed, he starts slow, he speeds up, and then he slows down at the end. Another way of viewing this is the speed graph. If we click this icon down here, we can select Edit Speed Graph, and you get a graph that looks different, but essentially explains the same thing, albeit slightly simpler. This graph shows how fast an object is moving, using pixels per second as measurement. It doesn't say where it is moving, just how fast. This graph is also editable. First, let us change it back from easy ease to linear by clicking this button, then watching our animation. Now when we click easy ease, let us watch the animation. Much more natural, right? Now let us change it manually to make it more pronounced. When we click on one of these yellow pull bars, we can pull it to change the speed. The higher the white line, the faster the object is moving. It also corresponds with the timeline. Note how the line peaks at about 20 frames. This is where it will be moving the fastest. Another way you could see how quickly an object is moving is using motion blur, which is very simple. For anything that has movement created by After Effects, you can add motion blur to it by simply selecting motion blur for that asset, then turning the motion blur switch on. As you can see at 20 frames, it is very blurry because it's moving very fast. Now, what if we wanted our circle to look like a wheel rotating, and not just a circle moving across the screen? We actually don't have to start all over to do that. We're going to learn a bit more about compositions today. Compositions, while also a scene that contains everything to be rendered, are also assets themselves. Each composition is also like a movie clip. So this movie clip can be playing something, but you can also be affecting the parameters of this movie clip, or composition, at the same time. So if we're playing a movie clip of a circle rotating, and then the main movie clip or composition is moving from left to right, it will look like the circle is rotating from left to right. To do that, we right-click on our asset and select Pre-compose. There are 2 options for precomposing. We can leave all of our attributes of our asset in the main composition, having them applied to the new movie clip that we are creating, or we can keep them attached to the circle. Since we are not given the option of leave attributes, we will select move all and we will open the new composition. As you can see, it moved our position keyframes for us. However, this isn't what we want. So what we are going to do is select these keyframes, copy and paste them. We are going to move back to that main composition, and then we are going to apply these position keyframes to our rotating circle composition. Now that we have our position keyframes copy pasted, we can delete them from here. What we just did is what leave all attributes does automatically. So now you know when to leave and when to move. Think of rotating circle as a movie clip, and that movie clip is moving in our composition, moving circle. Since in the movie clip, our circle is on the left, you can't see the circle until that movie clip moves over to the right. So what we need to do is in rotating circle, we need to move our shape layer to the center of the screen. To see how that affects the other layer, let us open both compositions at the same time. Go up to View and select New Viewer. In one viewer, we will have our moving circle composition open, and the other view will be our rotating circle composition. We have to lock both of them down so that neither of them change. As you can see, moving the circle in our rotating circle comp updates the circle in the moving circle composition. Now, let us put an effect on our solid color circle so that you can tell when it's rotating. On the right side panels, we have information about colors, a play and rewind section for mouse controls, our text options at the bottom, and our effects and presets. If you don't see the effects and presets, click the arrow to move over to the right, as it might be hidden. After Effects has a lot of effects, but what we are going to choose is a gradient so that when the circle rotates, it is visible. A gradient is technically a color correction, so let us click the color correction drop-down menu and scroll down and find gradient. As you can see in the G section though, there isn't a gradient option. That's because After Effects has things named in a way you might not understand. Unfortunately, the best way to learn this is through experience. The more you mess around with After Effects and its built-in effects, the more likely you are to know how to find what you want. What we are looking for is actually two effects. The first is called fractal noise. Now, we could use any noise here. This is just to make it so that Colorama has different levels to work with. If we only had one solid color, Colorama would change that solid color to a different solid color. Fractal noise adds a fractal pattern-based noise in black and white. Now we are going to add Colorama. Now that we have our colors added, let's change the colors to our liking. Open the output cycle in our Colorama effect, because we want to change the output of Colorama. Then let's check some of the preset palettes for something we might like. Now, I didn't find anything in the preset palette, so I ended up making this sort of blue and darker blue and slightly blue-gray pattern. Lastly, I'm also going to add a hue saturation effect to make our circle pop just a little bit more. Now, obviously, this is just a preference. If we wanted to be frugal with our effects, we could have just left it with our fractal noise pattern. So now that we have a circle, we need to make it rotate. To make it rotate is simple enough. We just press R for rotation on our circle shape layer, and then keyframe the rotation. About one rotation a second should do. Now we can view our animation. Except now it looks like we have a completely different set of problems. Well, for first, our circle isn't even rotating about the center. That's because our anchor point isn't in the center. To move that, we simply select that anchor point tool that I mentioned in the previous episode and move it to the center of our object while holding Control to snap it in the center. The second problem is that rotating the circle isn't rotating the effects along with the circle. That is because of how After Effects renders things. In this case, the rotation of the object is rendered first and the effects next. To fix that, we need to precompose again. Again, we are going to move all attributes. Again, we are going to move all attributes because we want the effects to be rendered first. However, we need to move the rotation keyframes onto our effects composition. Once we've done that, you'll see that our circle rotates with the effect as well. But once again, it seems like our anchor point's been misplaced. However, this time it is possible it's because our position is not in the center of the composition. So let's center our anchor point. Then let's make sure it is the center on both our effects and our rotating circle composition. So we go to Position, then we type in the width of our composition divided by 2. For us, that is 1920 divided by 2, which comes out to 960, and 1080 divided by 2, which comes out to 540. Now, if we view our rotating animation, our effects rotate with our circle. And if we view our main animation, our circle rotates while moving forward. There are obviously a few tweaks we can do to make it look better. Do you know what they are? I'll give you the answer for that in the next video because that's actually all the time we have for this one. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next tutorial.